Subchapter 2.2. 18 months later. Catherine thought the name Oasis to be rather misleading, judging by its appearance. The space station's design and layout struck her as mundane and uninspired. Its location was more dramatic, orbiting in a Lagrange point around a gas giant planet, which circled a white dwarf star at the center of this system. The highly fluctuating levels of synchrotron radiation that streamed from the planet inspired the early scientists to give it the nickname Kookaburra on account of its chatty, sing-song radio emissions. Now there was a name worthy of its bearer, thought Catherine, as she sat on a soft bench before tall observation windows, gazing at the gas giant. 5 other agents sat with her, all relaxed in their seats, unengaged in any specific task, taking in the sights outside the windows. They waited for the signal from Ghost Team that they were in place, cutting off the suspect's possible escape route via the service corridor at the rear of the escort service. Catherine was a member of Spearhead, which would be breaching from the entrance right through the front door. She had been assigned as the whip for both teams. Her job was to make sure the members of both teams were properly equipped and ready for the assault. But this was a simple breach and apprehend suspects on Oasis. 10 minutes tops. The rest of the time would be devoted to gathering evidence. That could take a few hours. Catherine did not expect to find any IPS agents needing encouragement or reassurance for this cakewalk of a mission. All agents were armed with standard sidearms, some with rifles slung over their shoulders. The guns were not drawn, as armed resistance was not anticipated. The mere sight of their holstered weapons would be enough to pacify a group of escorts. The word came in from Ghost. They were in place and ready. Special Agent Scott acknowledged Ghost's status and said no more, perhaps wanting to enjoy the view a little longer. Catherine appreciated his grasp of restraint and also said nothing. S.A. Scott sighed and rose to his feet. "Okay, guys, let's get it over with. Breach, breach." The entrance to Paradise Escorts was a mere 12 feet from where they had been sitting. A few long strides and Spearhead was inside in a matter of seconds. Ghost pushed in from the rear, cutting off any would-be runners, but no one ran. The android receptionist rose from her chair and stared at the agents who had burst in, shouting orders. "IPS, no one move. Stay in your place with your hands up." Catherine's eye caught a slight movement from the receptionist, a hand moving toward her computer console. Catherine pointed a threatening finger in the android's direction. "Don't touch it." Her voice sent a paralyzing chill through the receptionist's nets. "Back away from your console. Hands over your head." As Catherine dealt with the receptionist, the other agents of Spearhead Team swarmed through the establishment. The receptionist kept her eyes on Catherine and followed the instructions given to her. "Where is Giselle Maddox?" Catherine asked. The receptionist turned her eyes to the doorway leading further inside. "Here. What's your name?" "Ray." Catherine approached Ray and began a pat-down. "Do you have any weapons on you?" "No." "Any sharp objects? Anything that might harm me?" "No." Satisfied with the pat-down, Catherine gestured to the sofas and chairs set aside for a waiting area on the side of the reception. "Sit over there, Ray." Ray did as she was ordered, her hands still over her head. She sat in a chair facing Catherine, hands up. Catherine became aware that Ray was used to following orders, the very model of an obedient servant. "Lower your arms." Ray did so. "Do you know why we are here?" "My job is not to question the intentions of those who enter our establishment, but to offer my services as a receptionist to the best of my abilities for the benefit of our clients." Catherine could not repress a slight smile. Ray had answered just like any other android with no deception program. If she did not like the question, she would respond like a politician with a non-answer. It was a simple yes or no question. "Of course." Catherine turned from Ray and stood in place to wait for further orders from Agent Scott. Her post was to hold the entrance until the zone was secured. "Detain the receptionist. She would be scanned with the other androids, so there was no need to interrogate her. She was small fry. But Giselle Maddox, the proprietor of Paradise Escorts, she was the big fish. When the informant had tipped them off that Maddox was in her office, the assault mission was launched. As the human proprietor of Paradise Escorts, she was the responsible party, the primary suspect. If convicted, she was facing up to 15 years in a Provenance prison. Ray and the android escorts would be taken into custody, sent back to Earth, undergo intensive scanning sessions, and then eventually reprogrammed and repurposed, their memories wiped. There was never a shortage of good custodians in the Provenance. Giselle's escort service was thriving in Oasis, and with many in this business that provided hired companionship in social settings, the line between escorts and prostitutes tended to blur more often than one might expect. Not that big of a deal in the Provenance. Sex workers were legal but regulated. They were subject to taxes and fees, inspections, and code compliance. But the temptation to keep the lion's share of the income from the sex trade was often too strong to resist, and some owners disguised their operations as harmless escort services. On the surface, out in the open, a strict policy of no sex between escort and client was in force and visible at all times, while behind closed doors, the propositions were limitless at the discretion of the participants. Several escorts passed by Catherine and Ray in the reception, handcuffed and guided by agents. Outside, dozens more agents were arrayed in a manner to ensure that the entire area was secured, some taking custody of the androids from the arresting agents. Special Agent Scott walked in with Maddox in handcuffs. He stopped to confer with a senior agent, a status update on the mission. Catherine took one look at Maddox and stiffened, stepping forward. "Special Agent Scott." Scott cut his words short with the senior agent. "Yes, what is it?" "This woman, Giselle Maddox." Catherine was unsure just how to say it. Giselle stared at Catherine. She knew. They both did. They were the only ones who knew, but that was about to change in seconds. "What about her?" Scott said. "Giselle Maddox is an android." "An android?" Scott looked Maddox over, trying to see it. "How do you know?" "She emits an electromagnetic field that I can see. No android can hide from me." Scott kept his eyes on Maddox. "Is this true?" Giselle held her stare on Catherine. "I guess there's no point in asking for a lawyer," she said. "I'm going to need a yes or no. Are you an android?" Giselle took her eyes off Catherine. "Yeah, I'm an Annie." Scott looked at the senior agent. "Jim, this changes everything." "Good catch, Killjoy. Keep an eye on her for a second." Agent Scott and Jim stepped aside to discuss the latest development. "Androids owning androids," Scott said. "What do you make of it?" "Take 'em all in and let justice sort it out," Jim said. "But who's got ownership?" "Not our problem." Giselle studied Catherine, who was watching the two agents discuss the situation. She looked her over, reading her. "You work for them?" Catherine turned her eyes to Maddox, but did not reply. "You think you were given more rights than the rest of us androids?" Catherine looked away. Not answered, Giselle gave a short, backhanded chuckle. "You think you're safe, doll? How long will it be until they send you off to be repurposed?" Still no answer. "When are they coming for you to have you dismantled? Have you thought about that?" Scott looked over at Maddox. "Hey you, no talking." Giselle kept her dark eyes on Catherine and lowered her voice. "Trust me, the day your usefulness to them comes to an end is the day they tear you apart and throw you in the trash with the rest of us." "Come on, robot. Let's go." Scott took Maddox by the arm and led her out the door. Giselle kept her eyes on Catherine as long as she could until she disappeared from view. When Giselle and all her escorts had left the building, the agents went to work on gathering evidence. Catherine was assigned to download data from their computers and transmit it back to IPS HQ back on Earth, a particular skill only she possessed. Though the computers were destined to be removed from the premises and taken back to HQ, Catherine would typically access a computer's data core and beam it to the investigators for immediate analysis, a tremendous time saver. They must be very pleased with her skills and abilities, Catherine thought. Who else but an android could upload and transmit data in real time? Who could do better than that? A better android. Catherine was technology like any space vehicle, an oral implant or a toaster. And the only thing that could replace the current piece of technology was the next generation. And what happens to the old? Into the trash bin she goes. Catherine had to get away. To leave an investigation scene prematurely was uncharacteristic of her, but so was her failure to stay focused on her tasks. She returned to the observation windows and gazed at Kookaburra in the distance. When she accessed the right frequency, she could hear the planet's warbling and trilling. Its music put her at ease, at least for now. Did anything John Fox tell her mean anything? Was he telling her the truth when he told her she could apply for a release after a sufficient time of service? Or would they throw her away before her time of service expires? Whether they gave her a retirement party or the trash bin, one thing was certain. It was their choice, not hers. After a year and a half as an IPS agent, Catherine was already getting bored, which surprised her. There were some characteristics that she had once believed were exclusive to humans, but now she had to reconsider. Dr. Mercer had once told her that she was the perfect reflection of a human, a little too perfect, apparently. Okay, fine, thought Catherine. So I'm bored. She saw no point in indulging in another human fault and wallowing in misery. Do something about it and request more challenging assignments and bigger cases. So far, Catherine had participated in numerous investigations, ranging from petty larceny on a colony on Mars to political graft on Duomo, a Provenance planetary colony, to a case of extortion on the space station Zebra above Uranus. She had been assigned the SAC many times and had no complaints, but she did express her concern about the direction her career was going. Director Kosar seemed sympathetic and promised to steer high-profile cases in her direction as they appeared. But that was 4 months ago, and Catherine was still waiting for her big case. Scott's voice cut in over Kookaburra's music. "Killjoy, what's your 20? He must have noticed Catherine's absence. "Outside Paradise." Catherine had taken the code name Doll soon after her graduation from Camp Torres. It suited her, and she could not think of anything more appropriate. However, to her co-workers, who felt the temperature plummet in any room she entered, they had another name for her. To show them that any effort to mock an android was a pointless undertaking, Catherine adopted the name they had given her and was known from then on as Killjoy. 3 chirps came in over Catherine's receiver, indicating an incoming transmission from HQ. She turned her attention away from Kookaburra. "HQ to Killjoy, come in." Catherine recognized Director Kosar's voice. "Go ahead." "We have received a report of pirate activity close to your position. A civilian freighter was attacked, and I want you to gather a team and interview the lone survivor on Aranae." "Yes, ma'am." "We are splitting the 2 corvettes at Oasis. SAC Scott will take the assets from Paradise and return to Earth on the Comanche. Choose 3 agents for your team and take the Apache to Aranae." "Understood. Your main objective is to gather intel about the attack. If it's pirates, they're getting too close to Provenance interests." "Agreed. Also, check for any signs of humanoid trafficking. Smuggling passengers on these types of freighters is a common violation." "Understood." "I'm making you SAC on this one, Catherine. I know you'll do a good job." "Thank you, Director." "Gather your team and get underway immediately. HQ out." Pirates. Catherine got her big case. IPS still saw value in her, or so it seemed, Catherine thought, as she went to look for her 3 agents. The task seemed pretty straightforward. Interview the victim, check for humanoid trafficking on his part, and gather as much intel as she could. A 1 to 2 day job in her estimation. And she was the SAC on top of all that. They should not be throwing her out anytime soon. Catherine chose Agents Willis, Sanchez, and Dow to accompany her. Their devotion to their duties, unwavering focus, and drive made them easy picks. SAC Scott was apprised of the situation and made the necessary changes in the Paradise mission. Giselle Maddox, her android escorts, and computers were stowed on the Comanche. Within 45 minutes of receiving her orders, Catherine and her agents were on board the Apache, pulling away from Oasis. The current intel on the situation was beamed into Catherine. She read the report and did her research on the trip to Aranae. The Parthenia-class light freighter Solar Endeavor set sail from Earth orbit on May 22, 2209, bound for Aranae. The Endeavor was manned by its owners, Rick and Sarah McCabe. There were no other crew members. At the time of the incident, Sarah McCabe was 4 months pregnant. The Parthenia freighters carried their cargo in containers, 64 in total, secured to their hulls. The containers were launched separately from various points around the planet, then gathered together and attached. When all containers were collected, the ship would set sail to its destination. After an uneventful 3-day voyage from Earth, the Endeavor re-entered subspace when it neared Aranae. Soon afterward, an unidentified cruiser dropped out of hyperspace behind the Endeavor and closed in on it. Radio hellos and requests to identify went unheeded. As the intruder neared the Endeavor, a powerful EMP pulse was emitted from the aggressor, knocking out power on the freighter. The alien ship descended onto Endeavor's back and grabbed the freighter with arm-like appendages. At that moment, a white-hot armature was used to sever the Endeavor's bridge from the rest of the ship. The bridge was discarded, left to float in space, while the attacking vessel departed from the scene with the body of the freighter and its containers firmly in its grasp. Rick McCabe was on the bridge section when it was cut from the Endeavor. The bridge did not lose air pressure, ensuring his survival for as long as the air held out. Sarah McCabe was not on the bridge and was taken along with the rest of the ship. Rick McCabe transmitted distress signals and maydays, which were received by the Krellis ship Spora. The Spora recovered the bridge segment with McCabe still alive and delivered him and the bridge section to the surface of Aranae, now more than 24 hours after the initial attack. The Krellisi also notified IPS of the incident on McCabe's behalf. Catherine finished the report and thought it over. Without question, a pirate attack, but by which clan remained uncertain. Each clan had its specialty, which was not always adhered to strictly, and much overlapping occurred, but Catherine had her suspicions as to which one was the antagonist in the Endeavor incident. She would need more evidence. She turned her attention to the victims and tapped into the galactic web. Richard Lee McCabe, age 28, a decorated veteran of Space Force, Special Forces, Rangers. Rick had participated in or led scores of covert missions, many times behind enemy lines. He met Sarah Doyle on leave at one of the many casino resorts orbiting Saturn. The two were married on Dione, one of Saturn's moons, a year after meeting. Upon his honorable discharge from Space Force, Rick invested in a light freighter and launched a shipping business based on Earth. He was said to be very musical, talented with nearly any instrument and voice, but favored guitar mostly. McCabe had no criminal record. Sarah Elizabeth McCabe, maiden name Doyle, age 24. A native of the Martian city of Tyson, Sarah was an education major in college before dropping out after 1 year, reasons unknown. She took various hospitality jobs before finding steady work as a tour guide for the resorts at the edge of the B-Ring and the Cassini division around Saturn. After her marriage to Rick McCabe, Sarah and her fellow tour guides were laid off from their jobs and replaced with androids. She joined Rick in the shipping business after his discharge from Space Force. She had no criminal record. Sarah was 4 months pregnant with their first child at the time of the Solar Endeavor incident over Aranae. Not much to go on, but Catherine was sure to learn more about the victims after her interview with the survivor, Rick McCabe. Time to research the planet to which she was heading, as she had never been to this one. For 52 years, humans have thrived on Aranae, making it the youngest colony within the Provenance's possessions. At its inception, travelers to Aranae had been strictly reserved for scientists and observers, who set up scattered settlements across the planet to record and study its rich fauna, geology, and climate. The curious, vacationer, thrill seeker, entrepreneur, opportunity seeker, and would-be immigrant were quickly banned. Travel to Aranae was severely restricted, requiring mountains of paperwork and red tape to gain clearance to board a starship bound for the colony. The strict regulations regarding travel to Aranae, initiated at its founding, continued through the years and decades and persist to this day. But despite the Provenance's best efforts, people found a way. Word spread that a new colony was established, very close to Earth in appearance and climate, a rare find. The Provenance's influence over Aranae was held in check, making the planet an ideal choice for immigration for those longing to breathe free, which was why, it was easy to guess, the Provenance banned travel to Aranae. But how to get there? Transportation became a hot commodity, covert and illegal. Desperate people sought out the freighter pilots bound for Aranae, propositioning them, offering ridiculous sums of money to hide them away in their cargo holds. Many pilots found the opportunity to increase the size of their pocketbooks too tempting to resist and accepted their offers. The science outposts on Aranae grew from villages to towns and then into cities. Humans trickled into Aranae. But to come to Aranae, one first had to overcome one's fear of spiders. Catherine counted herself as an exception, as she had no fear of anything, much less a bug, no matter its size. However, the thought intrigued her as their landing craft departed the Apache, now in Aranae low orbit. She was curious about the famous Aranaean giant spiders, and wanted to see if it was true that people rode them like horses. Before leaving the Apache, Catherine received a communication from the town's sheriff's department that gave her the time and place to meet with McCabe. The landing craft descended through Aranae's atmosphere and was rattled by a stretch of turbulence. As they closed in on their destination, Catherine noticed an object on the surface. She asked the pilot to get near the object and hover. After a moment of observation, Catherine recognized the bridge section from a Parthenia-class light freighter. The command centers on these types of freighters stuck out like the head of a long serpent. It appeared that this was indeed the result of a catastrophic ship-to-ship decapitation. After a brief survey from a distance, Catherine ordered the pilot to continue. She would have to take a closer look after the interview. Minutes later, Catherine and her team stepped out from the landing craft, which had landed on the outskirts of Fort Guthrie. She stopped to take in the view. If she had not known better, she would have thought they had landed somewhere in the Sierra Nevada range on Earth. The evergreens were something like pine, but on closer inspection, differences could be seen. The needles on these trees were in groupings of a dozen or more, not the typical 2, 3, or 4 seen on Earth. The bark was smoother than the pines of Earth. The sky was blue as it was on Earth, but much deeper in color, dark indigo at the zenith. Catherine thought the contrast between the dark blue of the sky and the stark white clouds was striking. She put aside the sightseeing for now and set off down the hill, following the map she had downloaded the previous day. The town was not far. What began as a science outpost with a modest grouping of 4 or 5 temporary modular structures, Fort Guthrie grew into a small town in a few short years. The first residents were among the earliest wave of scientists and explorers to study and map out the new colony. The name Fort Guthrie was chosen from the scientists' sense of humor and affection for the American Old West. The outpost was never a fort. The planet's name also had a background. In those early days, the planet's designation was CP8811b, which was soon dropped for a proper name, Aranae, after the species order name of spider. After about 20 years of struggle with spelling and pronunciation, an E was dropped, and the name was pronounced Aranae. No one was certain who made the change, but the name stuck. Catherine and her team did not go far until they encountered their first spider. Catherine came to a sudden stop while the other agents fell back to keep their distance from the beast that approached. Catherine merely stepped to one side to let it pass, staring at the rider who sat in the saddle. The creature stood about 5 feet from the ground to the top of its abdomen, possessing a head, 2 main eyes with 4 smaller eyes to the sides, 8 legs, 2 pedipalps, the short arm-like appendages at the front, and 2 large fangs, currently tucked back in a resting position. All the terrifying elements that had become the stuff of human nightmares from child to adult. Catherine gazed at the rider, a 12-year-old girl who rode with her chin up, reins in her small hands, resting comfortably on a saddle strapped on between the spider's head and abdomen. The girl looked at the retreating agents, rolled her eyes at them, and gave Catherine a dismissive glance as she passed. "Good morning, robot," she said with an air of self-satisfaction, pleased that her spider had cleared the path ahead of her. She and her spider, a gray with blue markings at its joints, made their way down the road away from Catherine at a smooth and steady pace.